Pittsburgh Steelers fans, welcome to this latest episode of Steelers War Room. I'm your host, as always, Matty Peveril, the host of the show that likes to put you in the minds of Omar Khan, Mike Tomlin, Rooney II, Andy Weidel, and the rest of the Steelers front office as they look to put together a winning roster in 2023 and beyond, a roster that is going to compete, hopefully, for a 7th Lombardi trophy, or maybe at least just make the playoffs. So this is, I think, this is the second or third War Room show that we've been able to do as part of Mark and I carrying over to our new channel of Steelers Touchdown Under. You're hearing it right now. If you're on the audio side, you're hearing Steelers TDU on Anchor, Apple, Spotify, on YouTube, where Steelers Touchdown Under. If you're new to the channel on the YouTube side or on the audio side, subscribe to all of these. Hit the like button if you like it on YouTube. Hit the bell icon if you want the notifications of the shows. Mark and I will try and get out a live or two show per week. We definitely do one live at least on Friday afternoon, evening in the US. That's live on Saturday morning, where we live in Australia. And then obviously roll all that audio out onto these platforms of Anchor again. Apple, Anchor, and Spotify as well. So big sort of news over the last sort of 24, 48 hours as we progress forward to March 15th, the new league year. We're going to enter the tampering period in the coming days as well, where teams can start talking to free agents, etc. Big news of the week at the start was around Derek Carr. In the last sort of 24 hours, as I record to the time I record this show, you've heard a lot about Aaron Rodgers. Is he coming to a decision with the Jets? Daniel Jones has signed his big deal. Saquon Barkley as well. So we're going to look at all those sort of things, salary cap for the Steelers, all these sort of different things that factor in. And that's what I want to talk about in this show today. Is really like, what is the new year for the league bringing? What do the Steelers need to be considering as they enter this really important week? Who are the free agents? Where we're looking to make those signings? What have you? Mark and I talked a little bit about that on Mad Monday. But now some things are starting to fall into place. I wanted to give you a few quick updates. If you missed that show, and definitely go back and hear what Mark and I had to say, more focused around the Steelers and particular players about re-signing or acquisitions. So the first thing that I wanted to do, we're going to look at it quickly over the cap. So right now, the Steelers have total cap liabilities of about $235 million, which puts them in team cap space of about $908,000 according to Over the Cap. Their top 51 is $221 million, $256,913. Now, some Steelers fans, you might be like, well, hang on, what does this top 51 mean? So until the actual season starts, your salary cap is based on the 51, and what they call roster displacements come after that. So the way it kind of works is that this is how the league gets around your building that top 90. And then obviously the roster has 53 players, but really worrying about this top 51 is important. The other piece of news that came out in this week, which is really important, kind of in the last 24 to 48 hours, is Field Yates on Twitter put out the adjusted cap. So while the NFL has a hard cap compared to a lot of the other American sports leagues, particularly, it's not a hard, whilst it's a hard cap with no luxury taxes and all those sorts of things, the cap is not a 1-year item. Think about the salary cap, and particularly you've seen this with the Saints over the last few years with voidable years, etc. The cap is an adjusted cap. So each team, and so you got to think of the cap over a kind of a 2 to 4 year period. Kind of 3 is the sweet spot. Think about when we had Lav Bell, leave, and Antonio Brown leave. There were impacts to the salary cap, but because we didn't spend the money, we saved money. You saw this come into Madden 23 for the first time. If you don't spend money, it rolls over the next year. That's what happens in the league. So whilst the salary cap is just a tad over $224 million for 2023, there are a number of teams on this list that have more or less. Now, if you say to me, Matt, how do you have less? So there are certain players based on the number of snaps when you're a rookie that you get upgrades based on the snaps you play, based on making Pro Bowls, certain production. And you can go into the depths. Over the Cap actually are the only ones on the internet that really cover this properly, unless you go through the CBA and you go, I don't even think the NFL technically updated on their website either. But it can cost you more money. So for instance, Kansas City that won the Super Bowl, and obviously roster bonus is the same thing. So Kansas City actually have less money than the cap at $220 million. Kind of makes sense. They made the Super Bowl. Seattle Obviously, I don't know the ins and outs completely of Geno Smith's contract. They might have had some bonuses there. They had rookies play a lot more than they probably expected. Like they had 4 or 5 key starters as their rookies. There are 2 guys in the offensive line, Tariq Woolen, Kenneth Walker. They had guys that played a lot of snaps. So that's not surprising there. So you've actually got 5 teams that are actually technically have less money than the cap. So it's Baltimore, New England, Seattle, Minnesota, Kansas City. You have teams that are much higher, so like Cleveland, which is interesting when you think about Deshaun Watson and the way they structured that deal. And then maybe this is why they didn't bring back a top center like J.C. Treader. I think that was a mistake for them. He's actually the president of the NFLPA, I think, at the moment. So yeah, like the head of the players representatives. But he's an interesting one you didn't bring back. Carolina's got some room. That might be why they looked into the Aaron Rodgers piece. They're certainly not in for Lamar, well, that's what they've said. They're going to look to draft a rookie, I think. I think they're looking at Will Levis pretty closely. Then you got Vegas, Philadelphia, Denver, Chicago, Annapolis, Houston, Washington, Tennessee, Atlanta, Dallas, New York Giants, Arizona. And then you get to Pittsburgh. And all those teams have somewhere between basically like 27 million more to up to 5 million more. So Pittsburgh has technically 229 million at the cap. So with the adjusted cap, they're slightly over. But this is where it's interesting when you look at back to over the cap, their liabilities are 2.35 million. However, the thing you need to note here is that William Jackson III is still on the roster on over the cap. So assuming for Field Yates, these numbers are correct, which usually they're pretty good. And yeah, the salary cap's 224.8 million. Actually, when you take out William Jackson's contract, their liabilities from the 235 become 223. Then they go up that 5 point something million dollars. So I just wanted to sort of save some confusion that people might have there around the salary cap, what it looks like. As of today, the end of the day in 8th of March in the US, the Steelers probably have something like 5 to 6 million more than the cap. Really, really helpful. The Steelers can basically get $26 million from cuts by moving on or cutting Trubisky and Miles Jack, and then cutting William Jackson III and moving on Gunnar Olszewski as well. So, those sorts of things, and we can play live on this sheet. I can show you that. So that's number one thing I wanted to cover. Steelers have some room in the salary cap before they even, especially by cutting, William Jackson III, they're going to have a bit more money than what was thought with these adjustments. So that's really helpful. And when I talked about 26 million, that comes from an over the cap report, exclusive report, which I'm a subscriber, so I've got that there. And they talk about this in that report, but that was done on the 21st of February before the adjusted numbers came in. So they might even update those reports. But yeah, pretty cool from that perspective. And I will give a plug for over the cap. I think I pay like $25 US for a yearly subscription. If you're really interested in the NFL and different teams, well worth your time. So I wanted to also quite quickly look at some free agents and where they're starting to fall, because teams are starting to issue tags and what have you. Jimmy Jones, Christian Kunitz, Anthony Miller, all guys we've brought back. You look at terms of some of the bigger players. Roquan Smith's obviously signed. They put the tag on Lamar Jackson. Now, over the cap says franchise. I don't think they have a word for transition tag. Like, I don't think they put a designation there, but it's actually a transition tag that Lamar Jackson signed. You got Aaron Jones coming back. Obviously, Aaron Rodgers, big questions there. Daniel Jones has come back on like $40 million a year. Saquon Barkley's been franchise tagged. So interesting from that perspective. Tony Pollard's been tagged as well. I think he was transition tagged off the top of my head. So you're starting to see some things fall into place. So number two, what I wanted to sort of say is we're going to get a better sense of who's available, who's not. I don't know whether over the cap's got it. But Shaquille Griffin got cut in the last sort of 5 or 6 hours as well. So that saves the Jaguars. It saves Jaguars like, I think, $13.1 million off the top of my head. Byron Jones is going to be apparently and reportedly and allegedly, whatever term you want to use, has been told Miami are going to cut him. So immediately for the Steelers, there's 2 cornerbacks entering the market at a key position the Steelers need help with. And that's putting aside what, a Cameron Sutton could look like. And I will do a future video probably early next week around what I expect them to sign Sutton for. So yeah, it's kind of interesting when you think about the cornerback market. There's some veteran guys that the Steelers could go after, and B, we actually have a situation where Cam Sutton's contract, the potential contract money, might be depressed a little bit, or I'm say compressed. Let's say depressed is a bit of a let's not be that negative on it, but it's good for the Steelers because they might have to pay a bit less. So that's kind of interesting sort of outtake over the last 24 hours on how far things have shifted. And that's obviously a big deal because we're seeing the Steelers, mocked with like a Joey Porter or a Devin Witherspoon, even a Chris Gonzalez if he falls. Deontay Banks is the flavor of the month across like PFF. Half the NFL writers, they all think the guy out of Maryland, 6'2" big tackler, is the guy that the Steelers might even get, even ahead of Joey Porter. So that's kind of interesting. And I've actually got a video coming as well on Joey Porter in the coming days, and what he might mean for the Steelers, positive and negatives around picking Joey Porter at 17. So that's take number 2 that I wanted to give out for everyone in that regard. The third thing that I wanted to show everyone was around some of the deeper free agency sort of stats. And my login is not coming up, so this is always fun when you're recording a video. But is basically centered around like the value that the Steelers are getting from their different guys and what they might look to actually do when it comes to free agency, when it comes to bringing in players, who they're going to keep, who they're not. So the first thing I wanted to talk about is snaps entering free agency. Now, you might find this hard to see because Over the Cap runs a heap of ads, but this is where this is a really interesting point for each team and salary cap and how you get value out of free agency, because it's not a game of Madden. You can't just sign guys at everyone's rated 80 and you've got this endless cap. It's a bit like duh when I say that. But how do you fill snaps up? And why this is important is if you look at the offense right now, 41% of the Cardinals' offensive snaps are gone in free agency. Steelers are at the bottom of the list with 6.7. Now, that makes sense because that's where we've invested draft capital the last few years. Kenny Pickett, Najee Harris, George Pickens, Pat Freiermuth, Kendrick Green, Dan Moore Jr., Jalen Warren, for example, undrafted free agent. This is really good for the Steelers. Really good for the Steelers. Defense, different equation. We're top 5 in the league. We're going to lose more than a third of our defensive snaps in free agency this year, right? Ogunjobi, Sutton, Casey, Edmonds, Robert Spillane, who played obviously stacks of snaps toward the end of the season. Marcus Allen, who cares as far as I'm concerned with him. There's some guys there, right? And it's particularly when you do the comparisons on the different positions for the Steelers. So the most on defense is tight end. And basically that's because for us, and we are top 6 there, but it's Zach Gentry pretty much. That's the person that leaves. You've obviously got Freemuth, you've got Hayward. And hey, this is one of the best tight end classes in the draft. I would expect I wouldn't be shocked to see the Steelers use a first 3-round pick on a really top-end tight end. Really makes sense. Even a 4th, or maybe trade back into the 5th. Makes sense. On the defensive side, it's a whole different ball game. We're losing 47% of snaps, mainly because Aluala's off contract. He's a guy that's a veteran, probably going to retire at 36. Wormley's off contract. And one Travis Adams is on. There are a couple of other guys, but basically we're losing a lot of snaps there, particularly think how much Wormley played before he got injured. Edge, we're only losing 20%. You're really looking there at like Malik Reed. We're way down the list there. We're sort of halfway through the league. Safety, we're pretty high up at 48%. Now, KZ obviously spent some time injured this season. Edmonds as well. Depends what you do, sub-package. But if you think about Sutton too, when you think about the cornerback position, the way he plays in the slot, those sorts of things, it becomes a bigger issue. Now, this is a good example to look at sort of CB. We have a lot less of those snaps. Hang on. Yeah, it's not... they haven't calculated the CB snaps for the Steelers, which is interesting. But I do know that there are a number of snaps coming off, and you can see it actually through they do free agency. Where's the rosters? Position reports. There's a okay, see, this is it. So there's a really cool chart that Over the Cap too. This is a bit of an advertisement for Over the Cap, but Over the Cap basically do a really cool chart around defensive and offensive players, both starters and backups that come off contracts. So blue denotes a free agent, light blue is a restricted free agent, and then the red means games they missed through injury. If you go to defense, like, so we've got one of the lowest starting offenses. We've got one restricted free agent, Steven Sims, that you put a price on when you get draft picks. And we've got Derek Watt coming off, which, I'm a fan of. You don't bring him back. Move Connor Hayward there. But on the defensive side, you've got Ogunjobi, Wormley, Bush, and Edmonds. That's a guy I forgot on the defensive snap side of things. All those guys are off contract, and then you're probably moving on from Miles Jack purely to save the cost, because there's like a cap hit of dead money hit of like $2.34 million. You save $8 million on him, that's a win. Defensive backups, though, look, Alualu, Malik Reed, Robert Spillane, even though Robert Spillane was the starter down the stretch, DeMonte Casey, you're cutting William Jackson, James Pierre's a restricted free agent. I think they'll tend to something from him. So point number 3 that I wanted to make in this video is that the Steelers need to find a way to get value in snaps out of free agency. It's not just about getting starters and not just about getting depth. You've got to think, can this player, if need be, play a bunch of snaps, or do I expect them to play a bunch of snaps? And that's where I think probably from an Ogunjobi perspective, the Steelers probably are pretty happy about where he felt. He only missed one game, despite, remember, we only got him in free agency because he signed a deal with Chicago that they canned because of his health with his knee. So that's an interesting perspective as well. Now, the next part I wanted to talk about was around sort of the valuation of players. Now, this can get pretty complex, so I'm going to try and keep it pretty simple. Now, what happens is Over the Cap, and if you followed us across from BTSC, you'll know I do this every now and again. I don't like to do it in season. I like to do it at the end of the season. Over the Cap have what they call an OTC valuation metric. So what it does is it measures Pro Football Focus against the salary cap numbers in Over the Cap to give you a sense of whether you got value from a player. Again, this is only for for people that pay for a subscription Over the Cap. Again, it's like $20. If you're really interested in your team, I'd recommend it. It's pretty cool. But they're not advertisers. I really love the tool. Makes my life easier. The Steelers are in the top half of the league for actual contract value over their pay per year, right? So the Steelers' actual over team value over their average pay per year, which is how it's done, is $25 million. So the Steelers got $25 million more out of their team last year. Now, again, this makes sense when you've got a rookie quarterback, when you got a bunch of rookies, right? Look at the Giants, Daniel Jones and Saquon Barkley, rookie deals. You look at Bengals, same thing with Joey Burrow, Jamar Chase, a bunch of their guys as well. Falcons, when you've got like a Desmond Ridder playing there and Mariota on a cheap contract and like Kyle Pitts. Texans even, right? So you're going to see teams with rookies, and sometimes they're not going to have the best records. They're going to be in this lot. But the Chiefs are in there, right? The Eagles are in there. The Vikings and the Bengals are in there. All teams that like did well to made playoffs. So Jaguars as well. I went to a divisional game. So the point is you want to be high on this list, but just because you're on this list doesn't necessarily mean that you are going to be a winner. So how the Steelers can get onto this list, and it goes back to those snaps, as I said before, because if you can get value from a snaps perspective and add a dollar value, you're probably going to do really, really well in terms of this metric. And all likelihood, you're probably looking to spend key players. Now, if you look at value over the cap at a player perspective, just so Steelers fans get a sense of this as well. So overall value over annual pay per year is calculating. It's just a little bit slow. Yeah, so Jalen Hurts the most makes sense rookie quarterback, but this Alex Highsmith actually made the top half of the league, and so he was. Yeah, let's bring that back. I mean, I made a wrong click there. It's a bit slow to update. Yes, Alex Highsmith delivered over $15 million above his actual pay grade on the season in terms of value, which is pretty cool. Kenny Pickett was in the top 50, delivering $13 million. So again, like really nice from a rookie quarterback, even when somebody touchdowns like 7 to 9. George Pickens delivered $9 million more in value than what he was paid. Dotson, $8 million. So this is the sort of thing another team might look at and say, hey, maybe we want to bring in Kevin Dotson. He did deliver that value. And even though Steelers fans, we sometimes wonder. Now, this is an interesting one that I wanted to highlight because he's a free agent. And I mean, Dotson's on his last year as well, just an FYI, if you want across that. But Cameron Sutton, $8.3 and $4 million. So I think he'll get something in the realms of $8 million. I think he'll get like $6.8 million plus like 1.5 to 2 in bonus, 3-4 year deal. Given he's 28 off the top of my head, makes sense. But like $4.5 million last year, so he's going to get a pay upgrade wherever he goes. And he's a cornerback in there that gets top. He's not actually listed at cornerback, which is kind of interesting, which is might have affected free agency snaps on that other window that we looked at because what he does in the slot as well. Pat Freiermuth delivered over $7 million more, which you'd expect. Dan Moore, $7 million. When you got a 4th round drafted like tackle, of course they're going to deliver value over the cap. That just goes without saying, particularly if they play every game. Najee Harris was in the top list as well. He delivered $8.511 million over, and he's getting paid $8 million as well because he was a first-round draft pick. So that's kind of interesting from that perspective and what he was able to deliver. That's why when you see Marshawn Lynch, for example, name him as a top 5 back, actually his production kind of matches that. And we know it wasn't even Najee's best year. So Najee had a good year to close it out. You can't be good every single game, no matter who you are. So again, there's some considerations on value the Steelers are getting right now from their players and why Cameron Sutton is probably looking at something averaging, anywhere between $8 and $9 million a year in full contract. And that's not going to be overpaying. And KZ, like he almost delivered $5 million more in value in terms of the expenditure of what he's getting average pay per year from the Steelers. So that was one other insight that I wanted to give everyone because I think it is interesting to see, what value you get at different positions. And then the final thing that I thought was pretty interesting from, I didn't know that you could actually pull this one up. Just to make sure this is the right one. No, that's the wrong one. And we will go dollars per stats. How cool is this metric? So this I thought was really cool, and I spent a while in here. I want to kind of keep this to a 25-minute show for the audio guys and for the YouTube guys, if you can see it. But dollars per stats got pretty interesting. Now, if you go dollar per TD, now obviously Kenny Pickett didn't throw a heap of them, right? But like Trubisky cost $1.8 million a TD. $1.8 million a TD. He didn't throw many. Kenny Pickett was $500,000, right? Kind of shows you the value of a rookie quarterback. Mac Jones was like $278,000. Geno Smith, $116,000. No wonder they re-signed him. And then Jalen Hurts, team that made the Super Bowl but lost $68,000 a touchdown. Pretty incredible. Now that's his. I'm pretty sure it's his passing touchdown. Running back though, again, this is what I thought was interesting when you looked at Najee Harris. Now, when you look at rushing dollars per rush touchdown, he is less than Jalen Warren was $857,000, Benny Snell $805,000. My head, he hadn't scored a touchdown, but he must have. Najee Harris, less than $500,000 a touchdown. Now, it sounds like a lot of money for most people, and obviously it is. I'd love to earn $500,000 a touchdown. But when you look at it from the perspective of like a player like that with Najee Harris and what a touchdown does for your team, it's pretty incredible, particularly when you're averaging like 22 or 21 points a game. The other thing that I thought was really good value was the dollars per total yard. Now, especially when you're getting more out of a running back. So I don't think it makes sense to judge this out of just the rushing yards alone. But I thought this was interesting when you got down to Najee Harris, $2,500 a yard from him. Now, the only guys ahead of him that are like top players, you may be looking at Kenneth Gainwell, J.K. Dobbins, James Cook's a rookie. I wouldn't have called that. Raheem Mostert, who's 31, who's a free agent. That's going to be interesting for teams to have a look at. James Robinson, who the Jets traded for. So he's sort of in that bigger bracket. But Jaylen Warren, that value that we get out of him as an undrafted free agent, a guy that's easily our number 2 now, less than $1,400 a yard. Pretty incredible from those numbers. And then the other one, Pat Freiermuth was really high on this list. I'm not going to really go into that. But what I thought was cool was George Pickens. So I'm going to pull up. Boykin was like 81,000. I'm pulling this up because Pickens didn't get maybe as many yards as I think he should have got. I think it would have been different if Kenny Pickett had played the whole year. Deontay Johnson was $20,000, a reception, which, obviously he was like the Steelers' leading receiver from a reception standpoint. Obviously, no touchdowns. Steven Sims, 8,000. Now, obviously, George Pickens is on a rookie deal, but George Pickens, $2,000 a reception. And you think about the fact of his combat catches, how much he had, like a 65% strike rate on those combat catches, I think. Again, really incredible sort of stats and value that the Steelers are getting. So I guess to recap what I wanted to share on this video is 5 things that the Steelers need to consider in free agency. Number 1, it's like there are players starting to fall in terms of cornerbacks. Number 2, what value are you getting at a position from a snap perspective? Number 3, what value are you getting over the money that you're paying per year? Number 3, how do you decrease your dollar per stat? I think that that's actually a big difference. And when Omar Khan came in, he talked about using analytics differently. This might be some of the stuff they're referring to. I can't tell you exactly what it's going to be, but I can tell you that these are the sorts of things that you might start seeing. And then thirdly, when it comes to Cam Sutton and DeMonte Casey, like we paid Casey a couple of $1 million a year. He delivered $5 million more in terms of actual performance. We paid Cam Sutton $4.5 million a year. He delivered $8.5 million in terms of overall production if you're paying for that in full. So when we talk about bringing all those guys back that we really, really like, we do have to consider what that actually means in terms of, what their actual league value and worth is. And then, of course, you fit in with the Steelers culture, the defense, all those different things. The other thing, why is this important? The Steelers were $25 million, as I sort of talk through, $25 million extra value over the cap. Not over the cap, but they delivered $25 million more in value in what they spent on players. And that's a big deal. That is a really big deal. And particularly when you look at the two teams in the Super Bowl were there, a bunch of teams that made the playoffs were there, a bunch of teams that played in the divisional game or the championship game were all on that list. You have to be able to do that. And this is really important when you have a rookie quarterback. That's what you want to look at. So yeah, we paid KZ $1.87 million. He delivered value over the cap of 3.305. Pretty important from that perspective. So they're the 5 things. Look out for my video coming as part of the War Room series on Joey Porter. We'll do a quick video early next week around Cam Sutton's contract and trying to predict that. I do expect William Jackson. Oh, and that was right. That was the 5th or the kind of 6th thing we talked about at the start, was around Steelers salary cap. Steelers are $5 million ahead of the cap based on their adjusted cap. So remember, adjusted is looking at the cap spread over a number of years. Cut William Jackson the third as well. You move back from that 235 to 224. You add that $5 million on top. Makes sense. And it may even be more depending on how over the cap have computed or not computed the 235. But with that, I'm going to wrap up this episode of Steelers War Room. Join myself and Mark for all the other shows on this channel. If you like the show, hit the like button, hit the bell icon to subscribe, or hit the subscribe button and then hit the bell icon for notifications. Leave me the comments in the live chat, the chat because it's in the live video. But leave me some comments. Tell me what you liked, tell me what you didn't like, tell me which players you want to keep, tell me which ones you don't. If you want to have a look at free agency and you think someone's of value, ask the question. We're always wanting to get the fan input. You got any suggestions of stuff you want us to cover, put that in there as well. And as always, as Mark likes to say, go Steelers.